On June 24, 2025, a tense and expectant mood gripped Washington. Congress was bracing for long-awaited answers about the U.S. military strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, a series of actions that had sent shockwaves through the Capitol and left the nation on edge. The air was thick with anticipation, as lawmakers from both parties prepared to confront the administration over a decision that could reshape America's role in the Middle East and its standing on the world stage. Lawmakers expected a classified briefing from top intelligence and military officials. Finally, a chance to scrutinize an operation that had pushed the nation to the edge. For many, this was more than a routine update. It was an opportunity to demand accountability, to ask the hard questions about the intelligence that led to the strikes, the risks involved, and the potential for escalation with Iran. But just hours before the scheduled briefing, the Trump administration abruptly canceled, citing a scheduling conflict, as Secretaries Rubio and Hegseth attended a NATO conference overseas. The official explanation did little to quell suspicions. Many on Capitol Hill saw the move as a calculated snub, a signal that the White House was not prepared to face congressional scrutiny or public debate. The reaction was immediate outrage. The halls of Congress erupted with frustration, as lawmakers and reporters scrambled for answers. The abrupt cancellation was seen as a breach of trust at a moment when transparency was desperately needed. Democrats accused the White House of stonewalling, calling the move a deliberate attempt to avoid tough questions about the legality and wisdom of the strikes. They argued that the administration was dodging its constitutional responsibility to consult Congress before engaging in acts of war, and warned that such secrecy could set a dangerous precedent for future military actions. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called the postponement outrageous, demanding real answers, not delays. He insisted that Congress had a right to know the full scope of the operation, the evidence behind it, and the administration's long-term strategy for dealing with Iran. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi called it a slap in the face to Congress and the Constitution. She warned that bypassing the legislative branch in matters of war undermined the very foundations of American democracy, and vowed to hold the administration accountable. The White House quickly moved to reschedule the briefing, but the damage was done. Mistrust deepened, and suspicions grew that the administration was buying time to control the narrative. Political analysts debated the implications on cable news, while lawmakers privately wondered what the administration might be hiding. Lawmakers saw the delay as a calculated maneuver to keep Congress in the dark about the operation's effectiveness and legal justification. Some feared that critical details were being withheld, or that the administration was scrambling to align its story before facing tough questions. The stakes were now higher than ever, not just over Iran, but over the very balance of power between the president and Congress. The confrontation had become a test of constitutional limits, with both sides digging in for a prolonged battle over war powers and executive authority. The battle lines were drawn, and the constitutional crisis was just beginning. Heated debates erupted on the House and Senate floors, as lawmakers from both parties demanded answers and accountability. Congress was determined not to be sidelined. With the eyes of the nation upon them, lawmakers prepared for a showdown that would shape not only the future of U.S. policy in the Middle East, but the very nature of American democracy itself. The outrage in Congress was immediate and intense, echoing through the marble halls of Capitol Hill as lawmakers from both parties demanded answers and accountability. The uproar followed a weekend of dramatic U.S. airstrikes targeting 3 of Iran's most heavily fortified nuclear sites, shattering the tense calm that had prevailed for months. Employing advanced bunker-buster bombs, the U.S., with direct support from Israel, claimed to have dealt a devastating blow to Iran's nuclear infrastructure, aiming to halt what they described as an imminent threat. President Trump addressed the nation, justifying the strikes as acts of collective self-defense for Israel, and insisting they were necessary to prevent a greater conflict. He framed the operation as purely defensive, not a provocation. Yet many in Congress remained unconvinced. The most recent intelligence update, released in March, had stated that Iran was not actively building a new nuclear weapon, raising questions about the urgency and timing of the strikes. Lawmakers pressed administration officials, demanding to know what new evidence had emerged and whether the threat was truly imminent or exaggerated for political reasons. The secrecy surrounding the planning and execution of the operation only deepened suspicions, as key details were withheld even from senior members of Congress. With so little information released to the public, anxiety and speculation soared across the country. Newsrooms buzzed with rumors, and citizens watched nervously as events unfolded. The administration's narrative of swift, decisive action clashed sharply with Congress's demand for concrete evidence and greater transparency, fueling a growing rift between the branches of government. The airstrike set off a fierce and urgent debate in Washington, not just about the wisdom of the operation, but about the limits of presidential power and the constitutional role of Congress in authorizing acts of war. The nation braced for what might come next. The day after the strikes, President Trump announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, touting it as a diplomatic win. Relief was short-lived. Accusations of violations flew from both sides and the ceasefire quickly unraveled. The administration's claims of success looked shaky as chaos returned. Trump's public frustration, "They don't know what the FK they're doing," only deepened doubts about U.S. control over the crisis. Lawmakers now faced not just the aftermath of a strike, but a failed ceasefire and the risk of further escalation. The need for answers was urgent. What was the real intelligence? Was there a plan for what came next? Congress was left with more questions than ever. Congress needed facts, not spin. Lawmakers wanted to know, did the strikes actually destroy Iran's nuclear facilities or just cause minor damage? What new intelligence justified such a dramatic escalation, when months earlier, Iran wasn't seen as an imminent threat? Was the president acting on solid evidence, or politicized intelligence? What was the administration's plan for the aftermath, especially as the ceasefire collapsed? And what was the legal basis for the strikes? Did collective self-defense really bypass the need for congressional approval? For Congress, these weren't academic questions. They were about preventing another costly, open-ended conflict. Being left in the dark was unacceptable. The canceled briefing was just the latest battle in a long, simmering war over who truly holds the power to send America's military into conflict. For decades, presidents and lawmakers have clashed over this fundamental question, each side fiercely defending its role in the process. The stakes are enormous, with lives, national security, and the very foundation of American democracy hanging in the balance. The Constitution is clear. Congress has the authority to declare war, a power designed to prevent rash decisions and ensure public debate. Meanwhile, the president serves as commander-in-chief, responsible for directing the military once war is authorized. This careful balance was meant to avoid the dangers of unchecked executive power, but it has often led to confusion and conflict. In 1973, Congress passed the War Powers Act to rein in presidential authority after years of controversial military actions. The law requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying troops and limits unauthorized military engagement to 60 days. Yet presidents from both parties have often found ways to sidestep or challenge these restrictions, arguing that national security sometimes demands swift, decisive action. Many lawmakers argued that President Trump's strikes against Iran violated both the spirit and the letter of the War Powers Act. They insisted that such significant military actions require congressional approval, not just a presidential directive. The debate reignited old tensions, with some members of Congress demanding more oversight and transparency. The Trump administration, like many before it, claimed broad authority to act quickly in the face of threats. Officials argued that waiting for congressional approval could put American lives at risk and undermine national security. This argument has been echoed by presidents for generations, each expanding the boundaries of executive power. Speaker Mike Johnson even questioned whether the War Powers Act itself was constitutional, suggesting that presidents need the flexibility to respond to rapidly evolving threats. His stance highlighted the deep divisions within Congress and the ongoing struggle to define the limits of presidential power. The Iran strikes made this abstract debate suddenly urgent and real. Should one person have the authority to launch military action, or should Congress, representing the people, have a decisive say? The world watched as the U.S. grappled with these questions in real time, aware that the answers could have global consequences. The outcome of this constitutional showdown would not only determine the future of American democracy, but also set a precedent for how the nation balances security, liberty, and the rule of law in times of crisis. Criticism wasn't just from Democrats. Many Republicans were uneasy about unchecked presidential power. Representatives Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna, from opposite ends of the spectrum, joined forces to invoke the War Powers Act and force a debate on military action. Their bipartisan resolution signaled that this was about principle, not party. Even some GOP senators, though publicly supportive, privately resented being left out of the loop. Lawmakers worried the administration was creating a crisis without a clear strategy. The growing coalition demanded answers and accountability, determined not to let Congress be sidelined. The message was clear: the decision to go to war belongs to Congress. The administration's playbook was clear: delay, deflect, and control the narrative. Canceling the briefing bought time to prep talking points and cool tempers. Officially, the delay was about waiting for key cabinet members, but many saw it as a tactic to shape the story. Selective leaks and public statements tried to discredit negative intelligence and frame the U.S. as a reluctant mediator. Blaming Iran and Israel for the chaos, the White House deflected attention from its own decisions. But every delay and leak only deepened mistrust. Congress saw the briefing as more than an update. It was a test of whether the executive would treat them as partners or obstacles. The stakes for oversight had never been higher. This wasn't just a power struggle in Washington. The consequences were real and measured in lives. Congressional oversight is a safeguard, ensuring decisions to send Americans to war are made with care and public consent. Without it, decisions become insular, risks go unchallenged, and flawed assumptions can lead to disaster. Public hearings and briefings force the executive to justify its actions, exposing weaknesses and building consensus. Wars launched in secrecy often lose public support and legitimacy, as history has shown in Vietnam and Iraq. The constitutional requirement for Congress to authorize war is a promise to the American people. Ignoring it risks lives, treasure, and the very foundation of democracy. The administration's delays only galvanized Congress. Lawmakers mobilized, determined to reassert their authority, not just for Iran, but for all future military actions. In the Senate, Tim Kaine and others advanced a war powers resolution to block further strikes without congressional approval. The House's bipartisan coalition kept up the pressure, making clear this wasn't a partisan fight. The struggle over the Iran briefing became a test of America's checks and balances. Would Congress keep its power to authorize war, or would it drift further to the executive? The outcome would set a precedent for generations. This fight was about more than one briefing. It was about the soul of American democracy.